Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. My name is Bernard Avile. On The Point of View, we get the right guests. We ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. And tonight is a very important question we're trying to answer. As the globe reels from the effects of COVID-19, we ask whether you would have a job by the time it's over. We don't even know when it's going to be over. Different countries are having different projections. For example, today, the Netherlands said to us that they would ban all sporting and outdoor activities until September. Some are even saying life will not return to normal again until 2021. I have a crack team comprising employers, organized labor, and academia to help answer the question, will you have a job when COVID-19 is done? I'll tell you who my guests are when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Point of View. So we are in the month of April 2020, and it's been a very interesting month. Many people in this country have not worked because we just came out of a 3-week lockdown. That in itself has put a lot of pressure on different companies because they can't pay salaries. But we'll try and understand where we are economically with the lockdown over, but COVID-19 still rampaging. Who are my guests? First one is a medical practitioner who runs possibly the oldest private medical center in Ghana, in the person of Dr. Elikem Tamaklo, and the organization is Nyaho Medical Center. Doc, it's great for you to join us. Are you still at work or you've gone home?
I'm home now, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. I have two types of organized labor. I have the General Secretary of the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, and the person of Mr. Solomon Kote. He's also joining me, hopefully from home. Mr. Kote, hello.
Hello.
Okay, so he's the one in the African print. For labor unions, they don't wear suits. They're always in African print. Solomon, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us. I also have the Director of Research and Policy of TUC, Dr. Kwabena Nyakumotu. Doc, great to have you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Great. And of course, I have my professor of economics who taught me labor economics and macroeconomics many years ago. He's now the head of Department of Economics, Professor William Babwating. He's also, I believe you are home, not at work, Prof.
Yes, I'm at home. I'm reaching you from my study.
Great stuff. So let me start with some numbers to set things in order. So we know that in 2017, 2018, about 6 banks disappeared. We also know that 22 savings and loans and finance houses evaporated. Over 350 microfinance companies also disappeared. And of course, 53 fund management companies. But that was all before 2020 came. So already we had job losses. In fact, there's a story we have on our website where Dr. Pakwesi Indum, who runs Gold Coast, said that he alone had lost 3,000 workers. And I'll read that story for you shortly. Indum essentially was saying that his company, 3,000 of his staff, from his hotels to his bank to his fund management company, 3,000 of his team members had to go home. Then, of course, we know that tourism industry, the hotel industry, transportation industry, logistics industry, lots of industries have been decimated because either the lockdown or companies don't know where business is coming from because we all have to stay home. So tonight we'll ask ourselves, where are we with the unemployment situation? How can we ensure that a health crisis does not become a humanitarian and unemployment crisis? But let me start with Dr. Tamaklo, because one industry that has been busy are the medical profession. They've been working. Now, Doc, we are in a difficult situation as a country, but I know that medical practitioners have been busier than normal. So with you at Nyaho and your centers, how has it been? Are you guys working or you are also in lockdown?
No, so thank you for having me. And I think that it's important to say that these times are unprecedented. I think everyone has to adapt and figure it out. And for us, we, like every other company, has had to really work on our planning. Because when this started globally, it was only a matter of time for it to come to Ghana. We had to start in January. But as a hospital, we are in the hot zone, Ayawaso West. And so when it came to the testing, we started to see a lot more patients coming to us with COVID-19 type symptoms. So I think that from the emergency response side, we were very busy. But the reality is that the core of our business is outpatient. And so when we went on lockdown, we had a drop of almost 75%. And that is the bulk of our business. So you have to start to question how you're going to pay for salaries, how you're going to start keeping your drugs and your consumables. The second thing for healthcare is you have to pay for PPE. And the cost, there were so many people who were urgently buying that the cost price went up. And normally when you can have credit, you have to pay cash. It put a lot of constraint on us as a private institution. So I would say that, yes, we've been busy on certain fronts like emergency. When it comes to outpatient, we've been very quiet. And so that's one of the biggest concerns for us.
So you've been dealing with COVID-19, you've been working, yet your business revenues have come down. How does that work?
Yes. So, I mean, you have to look at the healthcare industry in Ghana. It's a combination of public and private. And private is arguably almost a majority. So when you say private, you have to think of not just for profit, you think of the NGOs, you think of the faith-based organizations, you think of the sole proprietor, the doctor who's running his own clinic. And so when you look at healthcare, it covers a lot. And so outpatient is actually essential services. That is where the bulk of people work. But the essential services like emergency, we have a crisis because not a lot of facilities do emergency. And very even few people do inpatient care, and even smaller do critical care. We have only about 62 critical care beds. And it's because it's so expensive. Not a lot of people can do it. So I think that's where, yes, for the outpatient care, that's where the lockdown affected most people, and that's where the bulk of private healthcare is. And so that's where the crisis of healthcare workers will be, because if they have to let go of their doctors and nurses, then they won't be able to actually take care of people when they get ill.
So for you, it was the lockdown that caused the problem, the fact that for 3 weeks people couldn't move, and therefore your outpatient business went down. But how many people do you employ? And are you saying that the drop in revenues could mean some would go home?
So, I mean, you have to look at healthcare like any other business. So not only was it the fact that there was a lockdown, but there was also a lot of fear. A lot of fear is that people's behaviors change, and so everyone is afraid. So I think that's whereby people actually started changing their behaviors even before there was a lockdown, and that's going to be the new world moving from here. So I think that in terms of our population, we employ over 400 full-time and part-time employees, and then our contract workers are over 500 in total. So the impact was that we had to let a number of people work from home. Now, I'm very proud of the organization in that we used cloud-based technology. As a company, we've always been very pioneering. So it meant that a lot of people were able to continue working from home, using Office 365 and using different solutions. But yes, we had to actually change the way we work. And even right now, we are changing because not everyone can be at the center at the same time.
All right. I'll come back to you. Let me go to Solomon Kote. So ICU, industrial and commercial workers. So who are you guys? What kind of companies have their members within the ICU? And then how has the lockdown and the COVID-19 affected the companies within which your people work?
Thank you. The ICU is a heterogeneous union. We're a general union, and for that matter, we cover every sector of the economy, beginning from the banking sector, the insurance, the manufacturing, the steel industry, the agriculture sector, the health sector, and even part of the education sector. We also cover the informal sector to a very large extent. In fact, our union being a heterogeneous one, we are also represented in all the 60 regions in the country as of now. And our broad base actually also hooks up with all rural banks in the country. Over 135 of them are also under our domain. Then we also have the energy and power, the oil and gas, all these mix up comes under the ICU. So with what has happened, we are having a facet of various reactions, one from the employers and then two from the workers themselves. Like you rightly said, this has brought some fear and panic, and we have managed the situation to say it's a time that we must all bring our thoughts as to how to get this issue resolved. The first thing we have succeeded in doing is in agreeing with employers to operate on skeleton staff, because the element of the WHO social distancing is a major factor not to keep the spread of this virus going. And therefore, that has happened. Now, beyond that, we've also made employees to accept the fact that it's a period where everybody will have to shed a bit of a weight, will have to sacrifice one thing or the other. That is, if eventually we want to see the end of COVID-19 and still get our jobs. So it's very tough for ICU and, for that matter, all those in labor at this point, to appreciate the fact that the employers we are dealing with are equally also hit with the negative effect of what this COVID-19 has brought to the entire universe. We've also made a lot of advocacy, if you have followed us, bringing workers to the understanding that this is what everybody should do. It's a time of sacrifice. It's a time of looking for alternatives as to how to keep the bits of the job, running. We do admit first quarter in most institutions are very checkered. First quarter in most institutions, some don't do too well. Some also, that is their favorite period to actually make gains. Now, hearing government to say it is going to go ahead and pay 3 months salary for all public sector workers have also brought a quite interesting scenario to the entire challenge that is before us. Because if April, May, June, the president came out clearly that all public sectors will receive their full salaries, and even to some additional allowance are going to pay. We are predominantly in the private sector. Has a private employer got that capacity? Are they having any buffer stock of savings? Are they having that which could even manage 2-3 months and what have you? And therefore, the challenge that is standing before us is that if we are all Ghanaians, and what the government is going to use to supplement the accountant general, for that matter, public sector workers to be paid, then we believe that the private sector should also be actually looked at. Because if this is also not done, and for the fact that targets will have to be reviewed for the year 2020, expectation of the employer will have to change drastically, because as we speak now, for the 3 weeks that there wasn't 100% productive work, and the fact also that borders have been closed, no exports, no imports, most employers have come to the crunch. When we take our major membership in the hospitality center, virtually all the hotels are shut down, because the capacity to maybe maintain 70 clients at a go. Now you are managing only 3 or 6 people who come in to stay, and the next day they check out. Now, we also said the government should have also looked at that industry differently, because they will need all the lights and air conditions in the room to be able to benefit from the kind of electricity waiver that government is giving. But now, that waiver will not have the real effect that will actually subsidize the situation. Hence, what we are faced with now is, if we are all not very careful with the already huge unemployment death stock, this particular COVID-19, when it comes to an end, we are going to have the worst unemployment situation.
Okay.
Not only, but this is going to be a kind of a generic issue that will run across.
Let me just try and understand a couple of things. Because your sectors are so broad-based, is it fair to say that the manufacturing concerns have been more badly hit than the services concerns? Because a service company like a bank or insurance company can work from home, but there's no way you can manufacture from home. So it means that for the manufacturing companies and the companies that do logistics and physical things, more people will have to go home and just be waiting than the services companies. Is that a fair point to make?
No, the issue on my premise is that some of them, they do have the raw material before they are able to work. And with the closure of the borders, those things are not happening. So it isn't an issue that the employer is not giving job. What is there to be offered is simply not there. and they cannot throw away the workers in that line. Hence, those in the manufacturing sector are equally also hit. Now, those who also place orders and come and buy from them, normally because of our West Coast, you find people coming from Burkina Faso, Togo, coming to come and buy whether plastic products or what have you, including even foodstuffs. None of these things are happening. And therefore, the projection of every employer now have got a negative backlash, and this have to be looked at. And all this, it is time and money that is running out. And hence, the employers are finding themselves in a very serious,
So what are the employers saying? Are they asking workers to go home, or are they saying workers should take salary cut, or are they saying take a leave of absence and when I get money I'll pay you? What's the general response of the employers to this situation?
Well, what most of them have done is that they've granted mass leave. And this mass leave is a term we have coined. It is not in the Labour Act, it's not in our laws. But we are saying that if this force majeure has brought the employer to a situation where it is not the employer's fault in not providing the job, but the circumstances have made it so, we cannot charge it on the employer. Now, that aside, they've also agreed that all those who are having outstanding leave can also proceed, so that those burdens will also not be there when this COVID-19 is over. They've also agreed that at the moment, those that they can lay off are those casual workers whose terms of contract have actually expired. They will not be able to renew it, because if they renew it, they are renewing it to jobs that are not available. Then to the regular workers, we will commend all employers in Ghana, at least those under the ICU domain. They are saying that they will keep the workers under some special arrangement. This special arrangement, they've also agreed with us that we will sit and then have some MOU signed to that effect, because the employer is also aware if he should allow all these workers also to go, he's losing experience, he's losing exposure, and he's losing capacity to even have to start the business all over. So this mix is helping us to continue the discussions and the debate with the employers.
Okay.
And most of them into groups. We are using the group dynamics to see whether we can have a simple MOU that can cover all of them and make sure we secure the jobs.
Okay, thank you. Let me come to the TUC. Dr. Kwabena Otu, you are the Director of Research and Policy, TUC. Are your workers government workers or private sector workers?
Both.
I see. What is that? Which, in terms of percentage, do you have more government or more private sector?
I think we have more government, but also if you, for instance, add the informal economy, which is an area we have recently made a lot of gains, then maybe 50-50. But we used to be more leaned towards government, but now the private sector is also coming up.
But since government has pledged to pay 3 months' salary for government workers, at least half of your problems are solved. So your other problem would then be the private sector people who are more the small scale people, because the government has said that salaries should be paid for the next 3 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, of course. But for the TUC also, we do not only talk about those that are members. We actually are also concerned about the large informal economy people, the farmers, the traders who are actually not our members. We are a mouthpiece for workers, and we are equally concerned about those people. But of course, the primacy is the fact that we need to look at our members. And like my senior comrade just mentioned, across the private sector, employers are reacting. And they are reacting in ways that you cannot really blame them. If you are an employer running a hotel and the occupancy rate is down 70%, I mean, you can ask workers to go on mass leave. But what this actually means is that you actually are not generating anything to be able to pay those that are on mass leave. In the normal situation, when workers are on leave, the others at the workplace working and earning revenue for the company. But here is a situation where there's no longer anybody. Part of the information you have made, and before I even come to that, I think to a very large extent, particularly in the formal sector, employers haven't done badly. They have managed. If you take, for instance, in the hotel sector, some of the statistics we have is that across the hotel sector, about 34% of workers have been asked to go on leave, take their leave. additional 40% have been laid off.
Wow.
Meaning that they have to go and sit at home until business resumes. What most of the employers have done is to say that, okay, we sent you home around March. We have been able to pay you your full salary. And I know some employers are struggling to be able to pay for April. What they are not too sure about is what will happen beyond April. And if you take the hospitality industry particularly, even with the lifting of the lockdown, conferences are not being held, workshops are not being held. So their situation, and I agree with Mr. Potter, their situation is a very peculiar case and it has to be looked at. But it is also important that as we discuss the question of jobs, there are just so many people. I mean, if you take the fact that we are no longer doing funerals, all the spinners that go and play at funerals, they have lost their jobs. If you take the fact that if you take, for instance, hotels in the rural communities, where people do weddings and do wedding receptions in those hotels, no, they are no longer getting that kind of business. So there are a whole range of people. If you take even the agricultural sector, if you take those that are linked to the export sector, for example, the banana industry, one company has asked about 180 something workers, about 187 workers to go home. And this is because the spot market for banana has collapsed. That can continue to export. With the closure of the schools, the pupil teachers, the private teachers in the private schools are no longer being able to teach. And all of these people will have to be paid. But you know the situation of the private schools. There's no way the private school entrepreneur will be able to pay workers beyond 3 months if there are no schools and if children, the parents are no longer paying the school fees. So it's a very difficult situation for employers, but also for workers. But as we talk about this, we should remember that the large number of informal economy workers, the self-employed, who, because of all the ban on social gatherings and many other things, they can no longer continue to do their work. We should have those people as well in mind.
Let me come to Professor Boateng. So are we going into a recession or a stagnation or a depression or what? You people, you teach us things like economic expansion, recession, depression, recovery, and all these things. I mean, here we are with growth going down. Almost everybody's losing their job. In fact, because of the lockdown, there was even inflation because food prices were going up. What are we in? What are we getting into? Is there any economic textbook that can define where we are headed in the next few months? Professor Boateng.
Well, thank you very much. I think my colleagues have touched on many of the issues. We've been in this as a country for 2 months, because if I recollect very well, we started putting restrictions from, I think, first week in March, and then we are about to end April. So we are just 2 months. So whether we are moving into stagnation, recession, or whatever you want to say would depend on how far or how long this pandemic ranges on. So if we are able to get over it by the end of May, we should be able to put our hands together and be able to ignite the economy to be able to do something. But if it goes on till September and so on, then that is where we would then have to be thinking about recession. I feel for employers, I feel for workers, because, I mean, as I sit here, nobody has spoken about churches, because I'm also a head steward of a church, and the church has about 10 employees. And over the last 6 Sundays, we've not had any church service, but we had to pay salaries in March. And as I sit here, I'm thinking about how to pay salaries in April. with my superintendent minister. So if it continues, it means that you have to be thinking about how you are going to pay salaries in May. Apart from that, you also have church members who are vulnerable. And in times of lockdown, you have to also think about how you can also help those vulnerable people. So I feel for employers and also for workers who may also want to, who may lose their appointment. But we should also bring government in, because government is also feeling the pinch as well. Because in all these things, if economic activities come to a halt, government will not get the taxes that it needs to be able to do what it's supposed to do. So many a time we are talking about government is supposed to do this, government is supposed to do that, and so on. So in all these, the economic agents that we have to bring all of them on board. If you put macro into perspective, where you have the households, you have the businesses, then you have the government, and then you have the export sector. So we are not having imports. So I know that manufacturers who depend on import. Of course, the global economy is on its knees. So even our export of oil is also having challenges. And as Kwabena said, agricultural sector who also have to export their products will also have to find other alternatives to be able to deal with their workers. And even government, because we also have cocoa. And government is supposed to export cocoa out there. Netherlands, Germany, China, wherever. All of them are also struggling to get the pandemic at bay. So this is a holistic kind of challenge that we have. But as to whether we will move into recession will depend on when Ghana will be able to overcome the pandemic and when the global economy will also be able to overcome the pandemic and also start operation again.
So what are your projections saying? If April, May, June, we are not fully back, what does that mean? Versus if things end in May? Because we work in quarters, right? We are in the second quarter. In a week's time, the first month of the second quarter would have been gone. So should we assume that we've lost this quarter, or what kind of projection should we be working with in terms of when we are going to recover this?
So I will say the first quarter, January, February, March, we lost March. So we are losing April. So if you lose May, it means that we've lost 2 months also in the second quarter, so we'll be left with June. I'm thinking about how government will be able to sort itself out if it goes beyond June. I am thinking that if it goes beyond May, government may have to rethink about going to other platforms. Of course, we've gotten something from the IMF, we've gotten something from the World Bank. I think there will be some kind of rethink, because where I sit, I know it is difficult for government because economic activities are not going on as it is. And therefore, government would then, and of course, we are an economy where we don't have the reserves. And those who may want to say that, well, why don't government ask the Bank of Ghana to print money? Well, if you print money and there's no economic activity, what are you going to use the money to buy? So that will also be a challenge. So from where I sit, I think government may have some kind of models. So if it doesn't end in May and it goes into June, what are we going to do? If it goes into July, what are we going to do? And if we are trying to help workers, and as the TUC director said, the informal sector cannot be left out. Because now if you go to the market, you realize that there are some kind of products that are not in demand. Because if we are not having any activity in the church, no conferences and so on, if you are a textile seller, you are going to have a drop in your demand. Because if I go and buy textile, what am I going to use it for? So demand has gone down, and it can extend to so many activities. So in the informal sector, that we have demand going down. And as I always say, the informal sector is linked to the formal sector. So as workers are being asked to go home, and if they are not going to get anything, then they're not going to buy goods that the informal sector are selling. So the informal sector will also have. So the entire economy is going to suffer. And beyond June, we may have to rethink.
This is the point of view. We are having a very grim discussion about what COVID-19 portends for the economy. Unemployment looks to be the biggest challenge the country will be faced with, because I'm told, for example, in the hotel sector, 34% of the workers surveyed have been asked to go on leave, 40% have been laid off. So how many percentage left? Less than 30%. My guest, Dr. Ali Kantamaklo, Director, Nyaho Medical Center, is one of the oldest private health facilities in the country. Professor William Babuati, Head of Department of Economics, University of Ghana, Legon, Dr. Kwabena Nyakotu, Director of Research and Policy, TUC, and Solomon Kote, General Secretary, ICU. When we come back, we'll ask, so what can be done? This is the question to address. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight we are asking a simple question. Will you have a job by the time COVID-19 is done with us? The US has 22 million people who are filed for unemployment. Estimates are that hundreds of millions of people globally would lose work. And we're told that the smaller the company, the less reserves they have. And therefore smaller companies, of which our economy is dominated by, will suffer the most. My guest, Dr. Ali Kantamaklo, Director, Nyaho Medical Center, Dr. Kwabena Nyakotu, Director of Research and Policy, TUC, Solomon Kote, General Secretary, ICU, Professor William Babuati, Head of Department of Economics. Let me read a few comments, gentlemen, before we come back. Hello, Bernard. You see, the issue of jobs in these times of COVID-19 is a thing of mixed feeling. I just hope they pay us all as public service workers are paid. This is the Atia Maxwell in Garu. Bernard, the cross-sectional job losses are incalculable. Many NGOs, which largely depend on foreign funding, for instance, will wind down because of the huge disruption of COVID-19 in Europe. Local resource mobilization would now have to be the option. But here's the case. Many indigenous companies and individuals have also been hard hit. This is Richard in Kotobabi. Kweku from Dansoma says, good evening, Bernard. Very good show. But can you please have a detailed section next week on the 600 million CD stimulus package announced by the President for SMEs? It's very important in today's discussion as well, because it will determine how employers will bounce back on time, hence re-engage most workers on time. Michael Awuni Boga, Bernard, our brothers and sisters who are teaching in private schools in the country should be considered. This is because schools are closed down. It means their source of income is also cut off. Let me come to Dr. Tamaklo. You run a private facility. You are one of the biggest hospitals, private in the country. Government announced they were going to give 50% of salaries of nurses or frontliners as an allowance. They were going to give medical insurance for frontliners. There's going to be free electricity and free water. Are you benefiting at all? Because you are one of the private facilities working on the front line, if I'm not mistaken. So are your staff benefiting from any of these things at all?
So thank you for the question. And, you know, I have to say that I value the efforts, the public health efforts, and the government has been really trying to actually address this. And I think I value that opportunistic way of working. However, the reality is that we haven't actually received any finances for our staff. And this is something that we've been addressing. We've been trying to engage, because now is the time that we now need to realize the benefits of public-private partnership. You know, whereby you have a complex problem like this. I think that my colleagues talked about every sector being affected. It requires everyone to come to the table and to talk about how do we do this. And I think that's really what my message is that the role of private sector in Ghana has to be recognized for healthcare, that frontline healthcare workers will prevent the spread. When my colleague was talking about how long will this go for, it's based on how well you can contain the spread of the disease and how well you can treat patients. You know, health equals prosperity. So any SME, any low-income worker who is not healthy will not be able to work. And the reality is that this stimulus package or the government's efforts, it needs to be longer, it needs to be more in-depth than a 3-month program. It needs to be one that can look at sustainability and one that can look beyond this impact. how do we continue to employ our frontline health workers to make sure that we have a healthy population? So the honest answer is I think that the government is doing its best and is trying to work, but we need to move faster. We need to talk more. And that's really important.
Elika, realistically, what can government do for you to keep you to employ people? So, for example, is it a tax relief that you need? Is it what they call a furlough, where some people go on leave and government in the UK, for example, government pays a percentage of their salaries while they are on some kind of leave? Do you have any practical ideas that government can implement for private sector healthcare companies, as an example?
Sure. And I'd like to say that, I'm speaking on behalf of other private healthcare, that you cannot say private healthcare. It means a whole spectrum of people. And so there's not going to be one size fits all, but everyone needs to come onto the table to figure out how do we find a way forward. So the practical steps is, number one, there needs to be a real policy on private sector engagement. If you don't understand how private sector is working, you cannot find a good solution. So the first thing is to get to the table and find a way of understanding what the real needs are. Some of the needs are practical, like PPE. I think that's really in kind. Once frontline care workers on the private or public can go to work feeling protected, I think that's really the first line. The second is also looking about how do you continue to offer the service. You need water, you need electricity. These are the basics, but you also need drugs and you need consumables. So if the pharmaceutical industry is not producing locally, then the problem is that how do you have the drugs? And so this is whereby other sectors need to be involved. The local pharmaceutical manufacturing now needs to become a priority, because if we don't have the drugs, we can't treat. And it goes back to agriculture. I think this is a great opportunity for pivoting. And innovation comes when you have obstacles. So this is a time that we now need to start thinking innovatively. Okay, if we're growing cocoa, how do we now start to grow other things that can be converted for medical use, so that we can actually find someone who can have the demand supply chain in our country? So it is not a one size fits all, but it starts by getting people on the table, a policy and a framework that can organize the data. And so we are very much on that journey with the government.
Mr. Kote, you are the ICU guys. A lot of the bank people are your members. And from what I read earlier, I'm sure we've lost over 10,000 financial sector jobs even before 2020. And now we are in this situation. Let's talk briefly about the financial sector. What is the major feeling among your members in that sector? How are they coping following the banking crisis and now this?
Thank you. The fear and panic is still raging on, because with what has happened now, I was having a discussion with one of the employees in a major bank, and he said in a day, if they go to check clearing, they don't clear less than 2,000 checks a day. Now, as it stands, they clear just about 300. That tells you that workload drastically gone down. This is telling them that, look, then we are not in normal times. Gains that comes from clearing has need that bad. And then people are also not bringing monies to them as they used to be. And in banking, one of the simple policies is that you need to receive and then give out. So when you are not receiving, how can you then give out? And people are not even coming to come and borrow. And hence, they themselves seen that the banks have started sinking again. Now, what we also know that with the banks, they are also threatened now, because workers that they have given so much loans to, and they are going to lose their salary, they will not be able to recover their loans. The bank itself had come out with an initiative saying that we want to grant some moratorium, that, okay, you can apply, we'll give you 6 months, don't pay now, and then thereafter. That gap of the 6 months, how is it going to affect the bank itself? Now, if we put that one also aside, the fact that the telecoms have also, run into their activities, and wherever you pass in Ghana today, every junction, you see a Momo money actually operating. So monies that ordinarily could have gone to the banks have all also been diverted. So in the banking sector, the fear and panic of losing jobs is very, very, very high. I will want to think that this is the time that we will see the real test of leadership of institution. this is the time that they will go beyond the normal reasoning of the job and see what good can we find in this COVID-19 that we can use that to change our circumstances. Because if we want to go on a normal trend, then trust me, even by the end of the next 9 months, we will not be able to recover from what has happened. Some innovation must be broken. If that does not come, then I'm afraid, because the normal revenue for these short 2 months that have been affected, and looking at May and June as it stands, even if from the health sector we are told, the escalation or the rising of the tracing has ended and it is not like before again. Okay, that alone is also adding to the woes of what is happening now. But then for the banking sector, the circumstances are that they are not selling money. Okay, and in banking, you need to sell money and then be able to make money. Number two, what it gives them the normal returns equally are also not coming because of the temporary shutdown of the economy. We are hoping that for us to get a robust economy for normal business transaction to start. For the short closure of the business, you will not believe monies that move from sister countries into this country, and for that matter, the market women and other businessmen will send their money to them. All these things have come to a halt. Okay. And for this matter, the banks are also suffering liquidity problems to enable them to do the normal business.
Let's talk about the manufacturing sector, the ports, and then the industrial sector. So usually when you drive on the motorway, you see workers sometimes crossing the road from Ashaiman to Tema to go and work. You see some of them in trucks going to work. And I'm assuming that a lot of factory workers are your members. Now, in the circumstance that export and import is not happening because of the problems at the ports and the fact that for a 3-week lockdown, you can't even go out and work. My question is, how damaging is this for normal factory workers who are more working class people? What kind of protections exist for them? Do they have, for example, health insurance? Do they have anything to fall back on in a period where they are not working for like a month or two? So what's your typical factory worker doing as I'm talking to you now?
Well, coming to the shop floor, I will say that the net effects of this COVID-19 on the ordinary worker is so severe, because here we are in our working sector, we are unable to make savings. So what has happened, nobody is having any buffer stock anywhere to go and lay his hands on. Then again, coupled with the cleansing of the banking sector, where investment that some of these workers have made are also not readily available in their hands. They don't have anywhere to turn. And this is what we saw at the period of the lockdown, that it was difficult for people to stay indoors without coming out. Now, the ordinary worker, again, who have been asked to stop coming to work because there is no work, where do they turn? And we just mentioned on this program, students have also been made to go back home. So the burden to the ordinary worker is so great at this point that if care is not taken, and for the employer is also not actually supported to actually hold the fort on these workers, we are afraid maybe we'll get serious social misfits at this particular point. We shouldn't get to that point, but that is what actually is happening. They are not having them. If they ask you to go, they take you off from medics. You cannot attend hospital, your children cannot attend hospital. All those ones becomes your direct burden. And we know our national health service also doesn't cover most ailments, and therefore the ordinary worker today has been loaded with a lot of worries, which it is not his or her fault. But we are edging on that in the midst of all this, no regular job is for life permanent, and therefore everybody should begin to think outside the box and see what can actually be done. The fear and the pain we are having is that those who are on suspension and those who are having their issues before the Labour Commission, there's a halt and all that, their situation have also become murkier, because where do they pass and who is there to empathize with them? And the situation that is on hand now, we are trying to give hope to every Ghanaian worker that it is not over yet. There's a way out, and that way out depends on you, the individual now, how to get some innovations and try to either create new things. Because I've said, if you want to go the normal way that we have done, then I'm afraid it's going to take us a long while. Not too long, Employers Association came out and they said, with what has happened in this 1.5 months, that it has not even got into 2 months, they say it may take them 23 months to be able to recover and then come on normal terms. So for that period, what then happens to the worker? And if they are even able to restart, it's obvious they cannot get the entire workforce to come in and start at a go. Moment, whether they are losing markets, whether they are losing contracts, whether they are losing some services that could have been available for them. If you put all together, this is telling you that businesses, especially in the private sector, are going to have a serious downturn.
Let me come to Dr. Nyako Otu. I'll come back to you. Doc, let me read something from our website. This is when your boss, Dr. Yauba, met the president at Jubilee House on Monday. Here's a quote. "We are in the process of assessing the impact of the health crisis on employment in Ghana. What we see is mind-boggling. Businesses are collapsing in almost all sectors of the economy. Many people have already lost their jobs. Many more will have lost their jobs without the easing of some of these restrictions. Government must intervene to stop the loss of jobs in the wake of the pandemic." Dr. Nyako Otu, what does your boss mean? What should government do? How can government intervene?
Okay, thank you. I think, let me take you from the angle of the question you asked about recession. I mean, if I remember correctly, my Professor Babuatin, what he told us about recession and the IMF's definition of what a recession is. I think we are already in a recession. The finance minister says that growth projection for 2020 was 6.8%. Now, with COVID and the lockdown, we are going to grow at about 1.5%. A developing country with so much potential for growth, growing at 1.5% is obviously a recession. Now, the reduction from 6.8% to 1.5% translates into about $20 billion Ghana cedis of a loss in output. Those outputs are actually undertaken by households and firms. Of course, government collect taxes of about 15% of those loss output. Now, if you have an output loss to the magnitude of nearly 20 billion, and if your stimulus put together the 1.2 billion COVID alleviation fund, the 600 million to SMEs, put together is about 2 billion to go against nearly 20 billion. We think it's not enough. And that's where government can come in to do more. So that's what the Secretary General means. And before I alluded to the
so you are
scale
saying
of the
government should find the 18 billion shortfall between the 20 billion revenue loss and the 2 billion they've made available? Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly. What we are saying is that the stimulus we have as of now is a good start. But if you look at all the sectors that have been affected now, and all the workers that are now looking up to government, I mean, you clearly see that we need to do more as a country in order to be able to contain the situation we have at hand. And mind you, this is only the first generation effect we are seeing. Assuming that all the companies that have asked their workers to sit at home, to work from home, if they become successful in ensuring that they use ICT to do the work, some of those workers will not come back to the workplace. And these are medium to long-term effects we need to be considering. The point we are making is that the scale of the problem is said that you need to try as much as possible to match the intervention with the expected loss. And that is where, again, maybe the doctor talks about the fact that we need to be on the table. We need to dialogue more, employers, workers, and government. We need to use the social dialogue mechanism to actually come to grip about the size, the magnitude of the problem we are facing, and define the kind of intervention that will be required to address those things. Let me emphasize, for instance, that if you look at the UK stimulus, is about 15% of GDP, of the UK GDP. That gets a bit closer to the output loss they are envisaging. So the point the Secretary General is making is that the 600 million is a good start. The absorption of electricity and water bills are very good initiative. But beyond that, for the banks, for the manufacturing firms, for the export firms, for those in the ports, and all the teachers in the private schools, for those who cannot sell their textile clothing because the funerals are down, and all the hotels that cannot hold the conferences and the workshops, we need to do something for them.
Okay.
And of course, coming together and sitting down to dialogue also means that we think about how we finance whatever interventions we need to implement.
Good. So let me come to Prof on that. We know the IMF has given us $1 billion. That's about 5 billion cedis. That's different from the $200 to $300 million we took from the Heritage Fund. So there's a bit of money, although it's not going to be enough. Prof, what's your advice as to how government should go about using this? Should they go into infrastructure, build roads, hire people to work? Should they pay a bit of it into everybody's bank account as a salary? Should they use it to boost agriculture? I mean, how should they prioritize the money that they have now, seeing that it's not as much as they would need?
Well, I think I will start from where Kobna ended. I don't know how he defines recession, but you can't have recession when your growth rate drops from 6 to 1.5%. If you grow by 1.5%, it means that you did better this year than last year. It's not recession. Recession occurs when you record consistently minimum of 2 years of negative growth rate. So when you have a negative growth, that is where you begin to talk about recession. So if you move from 6% to 1%, 1.5%, it means that last year, if the total GDP was 100, it means this year, within the COVID-19 and so on, it is 101.5, which is better than last year. That is not recession. Recession is where we were having 100 cities worth of goods, but the following year we went into 95. That means we've gone down. That is what we mean by recession. That is why I said I am expecting that if we revise our growth rate and then we come back and say, well, I think we are going to go to maybe negative 0.5 and then negative 1%. That is where then my thinking will go into recession. But what do we do with this? I think that is where innovation comes in. And I'm very happy that my colleagues have mentioned innovation. They say necessity is the mother of invention. And from government perspective, it will not be the best to use the stimulus package just to buy goods and services for people to consume. And that will not be the best. I am expecting the stimulus package to help businesses to start something, those challenges that they are having, to be able to get it back. I have a bit of a challenge if we want to use the stimulus package to pay salaries. And if we pay salaries, that salary will not get us any return. So I would think that
but if you
when we come to the table,
no, Prof. If you don't pay salary, how can people spend? And if you don't spend, how can?
Okay.
Because don't forget, we are an economy that is largely involved in buying and selling. So if people don't have money to spend, nothing will happen.
So let me answer that. So I was going to that. So that is where we don't have to just sit down, fold our arms, and expect that government will have to come in and pay part of our salary. You made mention of UK, and I always talk about context. Context is very, very important. If you look at the tax system in UK, it's totally different from what we have here. The direct tax that UK workers pay is not what we have here. So we have to look at it from that perspective. I would think that both workers, employers, and government will come to the table. All of us will have to look into ourselves and see how best we can come in and help. For instance, I'm looking forward to seeing a situation where employers will not just lay off workers like that, but will just look at the situation where they will say, well, if I'm paying you 100, looking at the situation, I will spread that kind of money so that everybody gets something, because the best that can happen to a worker is to be able to afford the basic necessity. And here, the basic necessity I'm going to emphasize will be food, to be able to buy food and survive. And for individuals, we also have to look at our spending as well. If we are spending on so many other things, this is the time for every individual to also look at spending and say, well, this is the situation that we have ourselves. I cannot consume as I used to be, and therefore I have to cut down my expenditure.
We have like 2 minutes, so let me just be clear. You are saying that the money should rather support business, so the business can keep people in employment, so that they can have some income to spend, instead of the money going directly to the worker. Is that what you're saying?
And there's a time frame there, because I'm not talking about just giving the money right now, because as we find ourselves, we are still having the pandemic. And therefore, if you give the money and they even produce, there's also a problem with demand. And my colleague employer made mention of the fact that they are not getting the clients as they used to. So even if you produce and you don't have demand for it, you'll still have that kind of. So you have to weigh it with time frame as well, so you don't stay in that particular pandemic and come up with something. And I will quote what Dr. Otu said the last time that we engaged on the same platform. Okay. If you don't take care and you give that kind of stimulus package to the micro enterprises, they may use it for other things. If he has his relative at the mall, maybe he will use the money to go and bury the relative. So you have to look at the timing as well and ensure that if there is going to be any stimulus package, it's going to be used to ignite the engine of economic activity and get our firms moving.
All right. I need to thank you very much, my guest. Time hasn't been a friend, but at least you've made your key points. Professor William Babwateng, Head of Department of Economics, and Dr. Kwabena Nyakotu, Director of Research and Policy, TUC, Solomon Kote, General Secretary, ICU, and Dr. Elikem Tamaklo, Director, Nyaho Medical Center. Good luck. I hope all of you are in employment by the time the recession or the COVID-19 is over. And thank you for being on the program. My name is Bernard Avile. I hope you've enjoyed today's edition of the show. Stay with City TV. We'll be with you another time. See you next time. Bye-bye. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on City TV's YouTube channel. Subscribe for more videos on The Point of View. My name is Bernard Avile. Thank you.
The Point of View with Bernard Avile, Monday and Wednesday nights, only on City TV.